Hello, RDs and RDs to be. Welcome to RD Exam Ready Live, a live session for RDs to be to learn how to better operate and better take the RD exam. So, if you're here, it means you want to join some of your fellow students to learn how to prepare for the RD exam. And if so, then you're in the right place. Tonight's session that we're working on is going to be focused on practice questions. I love practice questions. I love working through question strategy with students. I feel it's the best thing that's really going to transfer to your skills as a dietitian and really help to pull you into the exam is giving you what you need to really be successful in questions. And what that takes, folks, is that takes practice. So thank you for being here tonight to go through these sessions together. What we're going to do tonight a little bit when we do these practice questions, I'm going to pop a question up in front of you. I'm going to share my screen doing that. And I'm going to give you about 60 seconds to kind of start working on that on your own. Then I'm going to jump in as if I'm right there with you on exam day, and I'm going to try to give you the idea of how I would go about solving a question like this using the process of elimination. And then we'll come together and we'll go ahead and we'll walk through all the ways in which we can go through eliminating answers and choosing the best answer. The best way to communicate with me is going to be using this chat function over here. So use the YouTube chat to really kind of ask your questions as you go through because that's the best way you can communicate to get assistance. If you're confused on a topic, if you're not understanding it clearly, if you need more assistance with it, then this is what you should be using to communicate with me. So there's going to be moments, for instance, when I pop a question up in front of you and I say, okay, let me know what questions you have in the chat. If you don't let me know something in the chat, hey, I can't address it. But chances are, if you have a question, that there's going to be another student that has a similar question as well. So, this is all to say we're a very welcoming group. Do not be afraid to share your question and do not be afraid to jump in. If you feel like you have a good answer once you come to that 45 to 60-second mark, post it in the chat, speak it into the ether, write it on a sheet of paper, get it somewhere so you're holding yourself accountable. And remember, as always, RD to be, try your best in this process and let's maintain happy studying and positive studying progress. If you give me just a few seconds, I'm going to get us set up with our first question. Make sure you have your calculator, your scratch paper, everything else you might need handy, and I'll be right back with you in just a second. All right, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and dive into our questions here. If you're watching anywhere else, remember, if you want to come watch these questions with us, just go to the YouTube page, check that out, make sure you subscribe and check out our lives. This is going to be your first question that you're going to start with today. I'm going to give you about that 45 to 60 seconds to start working on it. And then I'm going to jump in to try to help you out a little bit with it here. So go ahead and take your time with it, post your best answer into the chat, and remember, positive studying mindset here. Give you all a little time to read it. Good. Hopefully, by this point, you've read the question. I'm going to start reading it out loud a little bit here just to make sure you're picking up all the pieces that are necessary. How much raw ground beef should a chef purchase to make 200 meatballs that each weigh 4 ounces raw? Ground beef has a waste of 25% in this case. Okay. All right, so you should be getting something on paper a little bit here for this question. If you need any assistance getting started, I'm going to get started here with you a little bit just to help you out as much as I can. Bring that question back. Don't do that to me. Sorry about that. There we go. That might happen from time to time, folks, so sorry about that. Okay, so in a question, I always want to make sure, just if you're struggling a little bit, remember, I'm going to look at what are they asking me for? How much raw ground beef should a chef purchase to make 200 meatballs that each weigh 4 ounces raw? Okay, so you can kind of see a little bit here of what we're thinking for this question. What I want to emphasize in this question, though, is what they've just asked. How much raw ground beef should a chef purchase? So, my question to you out there is this the as purchased or the edible portion? Which one are they asking me about here? How much raw ground beef? Well, raw ground beef would entail that they are asking for the as purchased, okay? Because we know that it's raw. So I always, when I start an EPAP question, I always write down what do they want me to know? What's my edible portion? And then what's my yield? Okay, so I always want to write down those three pieces and make sure I have those down there. As purchased, edible portion, and yield, having those down there. Now, as we look at this question itself, it says how much raw ground beef should a chef purchase for 200 meatballs there. So it looks like I said, they want us to find the as purchased. And it says down here 200 meatballs that each weigh 4 ounces raw. Okay, well, why don't I go ahead and get a total amount of weight for this, right? Why don't we figure out how much total amount of weight that would require, right? So if there's 200 meatballs, and each meatball weighs 4 ounces raw, then what I would do is I'm going to do 200 meatballs times 4 ounces per meatball. So when I do that, I'm going to get 800 ounces of raw meat. Okay, so hopefully you can kind of see that there. 800 ounces of raw meat is what I'm requiring. So let me ask you this, students. Take a pause right now. What did the question ask you for? How much raw ground beef should the chef purchase? What we just found is how much raw ground meat there is. So what you've actually just found there, folks, is you have found the as purchased. Right here, what you just found was your AP. Okay, so this as purchased that you are looking for here is 800 ounces, meaning you didn't even have to use your edible portion and you didn't even have to use your yield. And the fact that a lot of us haven't put our answers in the chat tells me that, hey, we're probably struggling with this just a little bit, right? So now I have an as purchased of 800 ounces there. And I like to be tricky. I'm going to be tricky to you because I want to really challenge you. If I have 800 ounces of raw meat and I want to convert it to pounds, tell me, folks, what should I do with that 800? How should I convert 800 ounces to pounds? What would be my conversion to do that? Let me know in the chat if you feel like you know. How would I convert this 800 ounces to pounds? That's right. That is very right. I'm going to divide by 16, okay? So if I take my 800 ounces, and I can divide by 16, or I'm just going to show you what I'm doing here. 1 pound over 16 ounces. This is the exact same thing as dividing by 16, and you were all very correct, students. Looks like you're doing great. If I do 800 ounces divided by 16 ounces, which is what I did here, I'm going to end up with not 500, but 50 pounds. So that would be 50 pounds is what I would end up with as the as purchased in that case. That's what we would have in that example here. Okay. So that would be 50 pounds, 800 ounces divided by 16. That's going to be your 50 pounds in that case there. Good, good. Okay, let's flip over and let's put that in there a little cleaner for all of you, okay? Remember, I always want to ask EP, AP, and yield. Although I did not need all three of these in this example, it's a very good helpful habit to build with questions, is to write these down every time. My AP is what I was looking for. 200 meatballs times 4 ounces raw for one meatball got us 800 ounces of raw beef. And then finally, I took that 800 ounces, folks. I divided it by 16 ounces per pound. And I ended up with your total for this example, which is 50 pounds. Now, I know that feels tricky a little bit, but to be honest with you, I want to give you tricky stuff. I want to try to give you some stuff that is difficult. There's going to be tons of questions today that are easy and just testing your knowledge. But in this case, I want to give you tricky ones because, especially for math like this, they're not going to make it easy for you, folks. So why should we make it easy for you, right? Let's make sure our practice is difficult and we transfer that in. Now, is there any students that have questions about number one? This is your opportunity to drop that into the chat on YouTube if you want. I can get those addressed, or we're just going to move on to our next question here. But I loved those answers that I saw out there. Very good. Looking great, everyone. Okay. Seems we're all feeling pretty good on this first EPAP, starting out strong on this. So a question in the chat said EP edible portion, right? So in this case, there was no need to find the edible portion. Under a normal question, yes, it would be good to find the edible portion. However, in this case, remember, look at what they asked you. How much raw ground beef do we require? That's what that 800 ounces is going to be, okay? So your AP, your as purchased, is 800 ounces. And that's going to be your 50 pounds. Good question. Good. Excellent. Let's do number 2 here, giving you 45 to 60 seconds. You should be about wrapped up reading this question. An employee working on meal delivery received an unrecorded oral warning for their behavior towards patients yesterday. The employee has committed another offense today. What would be the next step in the disciplinary process? Okay, folks, so I'm going to take my A, B, C, D. Utilizing process of elimination, very, very consistent process that we can use to apply to questions to help us to find the best answer. Very useful. Statistically, it's going to help us get there. Starting with A, oral warning with notation in their personnel file. Okay, so this is basically like a documented oral warning. Okay, I'm just going to hold on to that for 1 second. I don't feel good, feel bad about it. I just kind of want to see. B, termination. So go to immediately to firing this employee. To me, folks, termination feels like it's a bit premature. We have a disciplinary process we're supposed to go through here. It doesn't jump to straight termination. We'll talk about reasons in which it would do that. But no, termination for this one, it seems just a little rash. I mean, they committed a couple mistakes, could be an off couple days. Do we fire them right off the bat? not necessarily. C, a written warning. Okay, this could be a good answer that I want to hold on to. Or D, suspension. So suspension would be like being suspended from school. You're not allowed to come to school for several days. Applies the same for work. Suspension for work would be you're off for a few days. In this case, even still, I think suspension is just a bit harsh unless it was something much more significant. So I'm going to rule that one out. Okay. So for our answers, what we have less left is answer A, oral warning with notation in their personnel file, or C, written warning in this case. So this is what happens on the exam. You're kind of between this 50-50 shot, and you're going to choose what you feel is best for you. Now, I see a lot of us in the answers. We mentioned C, which I think is a really great answer for this. However, I'm going to pick answer A, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about this some more, students. So let's flip over and let's take a look. Okay, so directly from the textbook that writes all of the management material, this little kind of thing that I put in the bottom, this is exactly from that textbook. Well, not exactly because I changed a couple things, but this is going to be the 5 steps that are recorded per the text of what the actual steps are going to be here. So let's talk through those and let's understand this. What it always starts with is if someone makes a mistake at work, we're going to start with an unrecorded oral warning. Okay. Don't do that. We don't write it down. We don't put it in their personnel file. We don't do anything like that. It was an oral warning and it's undocumented. All of us here seem to understand that very well, that it kind of started with this undocumented process, right? Now, after that point, you can receive an oral warning with a file notation. Okay, and this is what is mentioned in the text. Now things are starting to be documented. That's what this means. So the second step would be giving an oral warning with a file notation. So saying in their file that, hey, they made this mistake and they were given an oral warning for that. Then we are elevating it to written reprimands. So written reprimand that's going in their file, documented, right? Suspension would follow that, documented, right? Termination would follow that, documented. So you can kind of see the way this is swinging through. Now, a lot of you here, we chose C, and it's not that C was a bad answer for a written warning. It's just saying that in the actual steps per what the text tells us, it says that it's going to start with that unrecorded oral warning. The second step would be an oral warning with file notation, which makes sense. It's an oral warning that's documented at that point. That might confuse some of us because we might think written reprimand to mean, okay, this means that they're being like it's being documented, right? But rather, what this means is an oral warning with file notation is I tell you, don't do that, and then I put a note in your file about it. The written reprimand is I'm giving you an actual physical piece of paper that says, today you are inappropriate to patients, and this has been documented in your file for this reason. Okay, so this is going to be the disciplinary process, folks. A few of us don't think we were as familiar with that step 2 there, but I can promise you from the text that oral warning with file notation is step 2 there. Now, I just want to make a little note here. This doesn't happen a lot in questions, but let's say we replace this situation. And let's say an employee working meal delivery goes in and steals a patient's medications. Okay. So they've received an unrecorded oral warning yesterday for their behavior. And then today, let's say they go in and steal medications from a patient. Well, let me ask you this. What do you think would be the actual next step in that case? Would we just give the patient an oral warning with file notation in a written reprimand? Or would you recommend something more severe if a patient was, or if an employee was stealing patient medication? What would you do in that case if we were to give it to you in a question? Because for me, if if an employee ends up getting an oral warning yesterday and today they do something as serious as stealing medication, I'm probably firing them. Okay. So there is situations in which you would not follow that disciplinary process. You would either probably suspend them or terminate them, right? If let's say an employee was violent, right? Was violent towards a patient, off the bat, we're going to terminate them, right? Like by far, we're going to terminate them if they did something violent, sexual in nature, things like that a little bit, right? So you can kind of see a little bit of our differences there. When in doubt, let's fall back to these 5 steps. For those of you that are a little bit scared or doubting yourself, remember it's okay. You just didn't know that step right there in the middle. Make this as your notes here, and then you'll be able to encounter all questions like this in the future. Great. All right. So just like in the exam, what you do is you shake that question off, right? And you only focus on the question right in front of you. So let's look at the one I've got for right in front of you here. Number 3, a patient who is a practicing Buddhist would prefer to receive a menu with options for A, beef, pork, and chicken, B, caffeine-free beverages, C, vegetarian menu items, or D, halal menu items. Take your time with that question to see what your best fit should be. Good. Love the students. Love how you're not doubting yourselves here. Looking good. See some great answers in the chat here. By the way, don't be afraid if you feel differently. That's helpful because that can say, hey, if there's a thought we have wrong, then hey, let's correct that together. Let's do that together. So for number 3, for the patient who's a practicing Buddhist and what they would prefer menu options for. Nice little religious diets kind of fitting into here. So for A, B, C, and D, I'm going to start with A. Beef, pork, and chicken. Well, I don't really think of Buddhists as being these big carnivorous type of people, right? I don't really think of them as always just like gnawing down on chicken and beef and pork all the time. It's not the types of foods I typically imagine in a Buddhist diet. It just doesn't fit with me, and that's all I've got to say about it. It just doesn't fit, and I would probably rule that one out because I don't think Buddhists really practice that type of dietary practice. I think they do something just a little different. B, caffeine-free beverages. Well, maybe I'm here on exam day and I don't know. Okay. I don't know about caffeine free beverages, but what I would say to that is just because I don't know it doesn't mean I'm going to pick it. That doesn't make any sense, right? You wouldn't just pick an answer because you don't know it. You'd want to pick something you do know. So I'll just put a little question mark by B for right now. I'm not sure about it. Maybe I like it, maybe I don't. C, vegetarian menu items. Well, I do like to fall back on the things that I do know. And one thing that I do know is that many Buddhists prefer to be vegetarian. Not all, some will eat meat, but in general, I would say most Buddhists prefer lacto ovo vegetarian options. I think C is a good answer, and I'm going to put a check mark by it. D, halal menu items. Well, maybe if they're very interested in that, but they're two completely different religions. Buddhists would be practicing Buddhism, and those that eat halal would be practicing Islam, for instance. So I don't think they would be too interested in halal menu items necessarily. If I'm between B, which I was just questionable on, and C, which I felt really good on, I'm going to pick C as my best answer, and I agree with all of you here for that reason. Okay. For the heck of it, folks, caffeine free beverages. What would be a religion you would think of that's caffeine free? Is it the Catholics? Is it the Jews? Is it the Muslims? Is it the Mormons? Who is it that isn't drinking lots of caffeine, or at least hot caffeinated beverages, would you say? Yeah, very good. Mostly Mormons, right? Mostly Mormons. Now, one thing I did just want to say, and thank you for those of you that have watched the video on this. I just did a podcast on this a few weeks back on religious diets. But what I wanted to say just about this Mormon topic, really quick, is the fact that Mormons, they do drink caffeine. Okay. They do drink caffeine. They usually just drink it in like soda. They do not drink hot tea. So this is not very Mormon. And hot coffee, and cold coffee. They don't do a lot of those stimulating things. And then extra credit to those of you in the chat who mentioned Seventh day Adventists. Seventh day Adventists also tend to avoid caffeine and alcohol too. So that's really good. So if you haven't listened to that episode, go jump into that. It's a lot of info you may already know, but it's going to be helpful just to reinforce some of your religious diet knowledge and help out with the confusion on a few of the religions sometimes here too. Good. Awesome. Awesome. Is there anything else in the chat? Drop something in the chat if you feel like you do have another question here. If we don't, we're going to move on to our next one. I know this was pretty nice and easy for all of you, and that's good. I want some that really help keep your confidence high, really help reinforce the knowledge that you do have. It's always really important to me. Good. Thanks, Veronica. Glad you liked that episode. Okay. Perfect. Looking good here. And then here's a little chart that I'll include. Make sure that all of you are joining the mailing list. I had that pinned earlier. If you need it, I'll repin it again. But I'll be sure to send this out. It's just a little chart that walks through the different religions, the cultures, some of the foods that we've talked about here a little bit. So that can be a nice little reference for you if you need a quick little reference sheet for you. You could always throw this on a flashcard, print it out for yourself, phone background, whatever you want to do with it. It's all acceptable ways to go about that. Okay, let's do number 4 here. Which of the following is true? Which of the following statements regarding unsaturated fatty acids is true? Okay. Once again, use your process of elimination and see what you can really help yourself to get down to those best answers there, okay? Okay. Should be done reading the question, working on your answers at this point. I'm going to read it out loud here. Which of the following statements regarding unsaturated fatty acids is true? A. Omega 3 fatty acids are 3 carbons from the alpha end. B. Unsaturated fatty acids can only contain 1 double bond per chain. C. The best sources include beef, chicken, and fish. Or D. Cis-oriented fatty acids have hydrogen atoms on the same side of the double bond. Okay, I love these questions on fatty acids and just general principles of nutrition because it's thrown us way back to our classes we haven't done in a while, and it's nice and challenging. So for this, process of elimination is going to be so helpful for you here, folks, okay? For A, omega 3 fatty acids are 3 carbons from the alpha end. Okay, maybe. I'm going to hold on to that for just a second. B, unsaturated fatty acids can only contain 1 double bond per chain. Okay, I think I need to get rid of this one, folks, and it's okay if you chose it. The reason I would say I would get rid of this answer is because we have both mono and poly unsaturated fats, right? Mono meaning 1 double bond, poly meaning 2 or more, right? So based on that, unsaturated fatty acids can only have 1 double bond per chain. That is not a true statement. That is a false statement, and I would recommend getting rid of that one because we can have both monos and polys. Okay? C, the best source includes beef, chicken, and fish. Now, no one in the chat dropped this as their answer. It's okay if you did feel this was the answer. However, here's what I would say here. Do we really think of unsaturated fats and think of animal products? No, that's not what we think of typically. We think of saturated fats in animal products for sure, but we don't really think of unsaturated fats in animal products. We think of more different types of foods. I would rule answer C out. That really doesn't feel good to me. D. Cis-oriented fatty acids have hydrogen atoms on the same side of the double bond. Okay. All right. So if I'm between A, omega-3 fatty acids are three carbons from the alpha end, or D, cis-oriented have hydrogen atoms on the same side. Hmm. Oh, so for A here, we're going to talk about this in just a second. I actually don't think it's going to be three carbons from the alpha end. Rather, when it says an omega 3, I think it's going to be three carbons. Oh my gosh, that's so annoying. Sorry about that, folks. I think it's going to be three carbons from the methyl end. The methyl end is also known as the omega end. Okay. So I don't think A is going to be a true statement. I think we're going to have to rule that one out too. Meaning the only thing I have left here is the answer D. Cis-oriented fatty acids have hydrogen atoms on the same side of the double bond. Nice and challenging here. Let's learn about this together, folks, and let's go through and find out why is this the best answer together, okay? All right. So let's start out with A, okay? Omega-3 fatty acids are three carbons from the alpha end. That's what the question said, but that's a false statement. Here's a little bit of your fatty acid structure here. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. So here's my fatty acid that I've got for you here that's very crudely drawn. But the way it starts here, this is an omega-3. So we have our omega end. The omega end is also known as the methyl end. The methyl end means CH3. That's what the methyl end is here. Okay, so omega is the methyl end, and that's what we have here. So whenever you're counting a different amount of omega-3, omega-6, what you're doing is you're counting how many carbons, and then that's where your double bond is. So look in this case, 1 carbon, 2 carbons, 3 carbons, and then my double bond. Do you see that? That is what makes it an omega-3. The double bond is 3 carbons from the omega end, okay? And what's helpful is we only really talk about omega-3s, omega-6s. We don't really do alpha-3s or alpha-6s. You could if you wanted to, but you won't need to for the exam, okay? Then on this other side, folks, this is your alpha end, okay? This is going to be the COOH over here, and this is what your alpha end would be. Still very important for the fatty acid structure. However, it's not what we're counting for the omegas. So a question here in the chat was, does this apply for omega-6 and 9 as well? It does. An omega-6 would be 6 carbons from the omega end, and an omega-9 would be 9 carbons from that omega end. In omega-3, 6, I'll draw that out for you, why not? So an omega-3, 6, which has 2 double bonds, it's a polyunsaturated fatty acid. Check me out here. So I have my CH3, I have my omega, carbon 2, carbon 3, double bond. Put that in red so you can see that. Carbon 4, carbon 5, carbon 6, double bond. See how this is a 3,6 fatty acid here? Here's the third carbon, here's the 6. Do you see how this all kind of fits together here? So that is what's going on here. That's how you would count from that piece there. Good. Okay, I know there's probably going to be questions on that, so drop them into the chat if you should have more of those. Let's continue talking about these answers a little bit, and then I can come back to any questions that pop up. Unsaturated fatty acids can only contain one double bond per chain. That's a false statement, right, folks? We know that poly would mean many, many double bonds. Mono means one double bond. So, unsaturated fatty acids, this would not be a true statement. They can have many double bonds in this case. C. The best sources include beef, chicken, and fish. No, not for the unsaturated. Rather, for unsaturated, I would think of things like fish would be a nice animal based source. Oils like seed oils, olive oils, avocado oils, different types of oils there. Nuts and seeds. Those would all be things that are nice and rich in those unsaturated fats there. And then lastly, let's talk a bit about orientation here. Okay, so let's go to orientation of our fatty acid. So I want you to all think back, way back in your first class, and remember when they talked about cis versus trans fatty acids. Now, luckily enough for all of us RDs to be in RDs, we don't have to deal with trans fatty acids because they've mostly been outlawed in foods, except in very small amounts. However, here's what was going on. The word cis means same, right? Okay, like the term cisgender, right? Okay, that's my like bisco to, right? Same in that case. So cis means same. Cis oriented fatty acids have hydrogen atoms on the same side of the double bond, okay? This is what a cis fat looks like here. These fatty acids that I've drawn up here, they look very linear, as you can tell, but in reality, they don't look like that. They're actually kind of bent. Unsaturated fatty acids, they're kind of bent like this, okay? So our good fats are cis oriented fatty acids. What happens is you have your one, two, three, you have your double bond, okay? And then what happens is in a cis fatty acid, this helps to contribute to its structure. These hydrogens are on the same side, okay? These hydrogens will be on the same side versus a trans fatty acid is when they're on the opposite side, okay? So a trans fatty acid would be if I took this hydrogen, I put it on the other side of the chain, right? So it's kind of like oblong or opposite a little bit. That's trans, okay? Cis is where they're on the same side together here. And a question in the chat said, will we actually see questions like this on the exam? It's entirely possible. Will it get this down into your unsaturated fatty acids? I don't know. But let's ask you this. Are omega 3s going to be on the exam? Yep. Are unsaturated fatty acids going to be on the exam? Yep. Is sources of fats or different vitamins, minerals, macros going to be on the exam? Certainly. Could orientation on these be on the exam? Yep, it definitely could be. Trans fatty acids, I mean, that's part about understanding things about dietetics for sure, and this fits in here. Okay. Good. I saw another question in the chat. So, general question on the day of the exam, how would you approach a question if you couldn't work your way through each answer choice because you genuinely didn't know the rationale behind each choice? That's a really great question here. This is when I fall back on process of elimination. And a couple pieces that I've told you here as I was looking at this is I said, I want to fall back on what I know, not what I don't know. Okay. I think all of us can approach this question and say, I know something about fatty acids. I don't know all things about fatty acids, but I probably know something. And when it comes to this, and if you really have to make a guess on the exam, what I want you to do is use your process of elimination to at least get rid of one answer. And based on what you know, get rid of one answer because statistically, you've just taken your odds from 1 to 4, 1 out of 4, and you brought them down to 1 out of 3. That's pretty good odds, if you ask me. It's not the best, but we can get them better. And then let's say you even got rid of 2 answers. Well, now it's a coin flip. It's literally a 50-50 shot of you getting that question right, just based on you having a little bit of knowledge to eliminate 2 answers, okay? So that would be my tip is use the process of elimination to eliminate answers that you know just can't fit deep in your heart. Sometimes you're going to be wrong doing that. That's going to happen, okay? Because statistically, it's supposed to help you get more questions right. And that's all we need to do for the exam is just get more things right, don't we? By any means necessary. Lots of great questions on that one, folks. Okay, shifting gears a little bit, and let's go through a little TPN for this question here. So go ahead, for those of us here on YouTube, go ahead and give that a read. Um, what I'm going to read this out is: calculate the total calories from protein provided to a patient receiving the following TPN formula in a day: 2,000 milliliters of amino acid 20%, 1,500 milliliters of dextrose 30%, and 500 mils of lipid 20%. Going to give you about 45 seconds to start in on this, and then I'll jump in with you. Always caution you to be very careful, just reading as carefully as you can on a TPN and an EN question. Really, any question, but knowing what they're asking for is going to be so key for you. Okay. You should be kind of have some stuff on paper a little bit. I'm going to jump in here a little bit to help us out with this question for any that we're waiting on a little bit. Calculate the total calories from protein provided from this TPN formula. As we said, we had 2,000 mils of amino acid, 20%, 1,500 mils of dextrose, 30%, 500 mils of lipid, 20%. My question to you is, and you might have already figured this out, do I actually need to use my dextrose in lipid? Well, no, because it said calculate the total calories from protein. So technically, you don't even need to use your dextrose and lipids for this question. If you read nice and carefully or listen carefully, you would save yourself some time to only know that you just have to do your protein in this case. So let's do the protein together. My favorite process, it's not unique to me. It's the process I recommend every student and every dietitian really use if you're going to calculate out TPN formulas, is you're going to take your total volume, right? You're going to take that total volume and you're going to multiply it by the concentration of that total volume. So that would be 2,000 times 0.20. Okay. Excuse me, Zach. You got to do your units. Your unit, Zach. So bad. All right. Milliliters, 2,000 milliliters times 0.20. Remember, folks, just do the 0.20. That's totally cool. For those of you that need a reminder, this basically means 20 grams per 100 mils. Okay. So that's what 20% is. It's 20 grams per 100 mils there. But the way we treat that is we just do times the percentage there. Okay. So in that case, it would be 2,000 times 0.20. Now I don't have a calculator in front of me, but I think I can probably figure this out instead. So if I did 2,000 times 0.10, boom, boom, boom. Good. So in that case, good. 2,000 times 0.40, 4. This would be 400 grams. Okay, so this would be 400 grams in that case, is what that's going to be. 400 grams of amino acid. Then I just have to go back and I have to do 400 grams times 4 kcals for 1 gram. Okay. My grams are then going to cross themselves out. 400 times 4 is 1,600 kcals. Okay, 1,600 kcals is what I'm going to be getting just from the protein here. And that'll be my best answer for C right here. Okay, and I saw a lot of us get to that here. I saw someone in the chat. Yeah. So someone asked in the chat, can you calculate dextrose and lipid calories, please? I can, but I'm going to need assistance from all of you a little bit to help me out with it. Let's do that together. So my dextrose, I'm going to set up the exact same way. I'm going to do 1,500 milliliters times 0.30. Okay. So for our student that asked for this in the chat, I want you to do that in your calculator and tell me, what did you get when you did 1500 times 0.30? Work through that and tell me how many grams of dextrose I got when I did 1500 times 0.30. What did we get? Okay. So what I see here is when we did 1500 times 0.30, we ended up with 450 grams. So 450 grams of dextrose is what's being provided there. Then, very good. Thank you for doing this already in the chat. So 450 grams, we're going to multiply that by how many calories per gram of dextrose, which surely would be 4, right? No, that wouldn't be right, Zach, because dextrose has a little bit less calories than that of carbohydrates. So dextrose would be 450 grams times 3.4 calories per gram. 3.4 kcals, 1 gram. Finally, after all of that, I would say the dextrose we're going to get is going to be what? Right around 1530 or so, right? Good. Just confirm that I have that correct here, folks. Okay. Very good job. Now, finally, if you needed to find the lipid, remember with lipids, you've got 10%, 20%, and 30% lipids, okay? I would challenge all of you to go out and find out how much calories per milliliter is in the 10% and the 30%. That should be on your study list. A 20% lipid would mean that there is 2 kcals for every 1 milliliter of lipid. Okay, that's what a 20% means, is for every 1 milliliter of lipid, there's 2 kcals. So if I'm just doing the lipids, that would be 500 milliliters times 2 kcals per 1 milliliter. That would be 1,000 kcals just from the lipids there. If I get my bubble head out of the way here. Okay. So you can kind of see that math. We did not need to calculate the lipids or the dextrose in this case, but if we wanted to, this is how we would go about doing that. Good. Very nice. Very nice. Great questions in the chat there. Hopefully you enjoyed that TPN question. I didn't make it too hard for you because you only needed to do the protein in this case, but it's always good practice to walk through all 3 macros as well. Okay. Good, good. All right, folks, let's move on to our next one here. A little bit of a challenge one, but more of like a knowledgey type of question a little bit here. A dietitian that practices according to the code of ethics for the profession of nutrition and dietetics practitioners must practice with non-malfeasance, autonomy, beneficence, and what? What is the 4th code of ethics that fits into there? Our 4th one. By the way, it's okay if you don't know this question. It's totally fine. Some of us might have seen it in questions before. Some of us might not have. A would be environmental responsibility. B is trustworthiness. C is autonomy. And D is justice. When I'm using my process of elimination here, well, automatically, the fact that autonomy is in there twice probably tells me that autonomy is not going to be my best answer, right? Okay, can't have it in there twice. B, trustworthiness. I don't know. Trustworthiness, that sounds like I'm in like elementary school again. Like, be trustworthy. Doesn't seem like it's a big fit of code of ethics, right? I think I would rule that one out, and I think I will. Trustworthiness is going to be out. It just feels off to me. So I have A, environmental responsibility, kind of like sustainability, composting, environment, things like that. Or D, justice. So if I looked between those two, it could be A, but I would probably say D, justice, would be the best fit for the code of ethics for nutrition and dietetics. And let's take a look at these together here, folks. So these are the four code of ethics for dietitians. It's mentioned in the CDR outline, for instance, to know these. So, yeah, we got to know the code of ethics and what the purpose of it is for. It's meant to serve as like an ethical guide for dietitians, right? So, that being said, here's the four elements of it, the four standards. Non malfeasance would be basic. I like kind of just gave you some summary words here. This is like competence and professional development and practice. It would be things like, attending professional practices, staying up to date, using evidence-based research, doing the right things that we should do for the code of ethics for dietitians in that case. Okay. The next one that we would have on this list is going to be autonomy. Okay. When we say autonomy, autonomy is someone's ability to like make decisions for themselves, choose what they want to do, for instance. And what it's kind of said here is it's kind of like respect client autonomy and abide by laws, rules, and regulations. This would include things like disclosing any conflicts of interests or financial interests you have, complying with all laws and regulations, maintaining your credentials, respecting intellectual property and copyright infringement, things like that. Documenting things correctly, billing things correctly. This would all fit into that autonomy, as well as giving the client autonomy fits in there too. Beneficence is kind of all about professionalism. So this is kind of act of doing good and respecting others' values. Okay. So that would be like refraining from stereotyping, right? Stereotyping is not very professional. It would include things like upholding professional boundaries, not having romantic relationships with clients and students, things like that. Respecting the values, rights, knowledge, culture of the different clients you're working with. This would all fit into that beneficence. And then, fourthly, justice. Okay. Justice, it makes a couple points in this case, promoting fairness and objectivity with fair and equitable treatment. That would include things like where the culture is of your patient, treating people equally, for instance. Seeking leadership opportunities in your environment, looking into things such as collaborating with others, working with others, demonstrating cultural humility, promoting the unique role of dietitians and professionals. This would all fit into that justice piece here as well. Okay. So those are going to be your four code of ethics. My biggest recommendation is just take those and throw those on a flashcard, get some repetition with them. That's the only way you're probably going to get them to stick, or come up with some type of like mnemonic or acronym of some way that you can definitely come up with as being a nice, fun one, right? It could be, you could come up with any, right? Like, um, could be like nine, let's say nine, male, um, what would be a good A? Let's say nine male ant eaters. Let's do this. So let's say nine male ant eaters benefit in July, right? So you can come up with any types of phrasings like non malfeasance, autonomy, beneficence, in July, or justice. You can kind of come up with your own little kind of ways to do that, or throw them on a flashcard, teach them to someone else. Those are all be helpful tips to do too. Okay. All right, folks. All right, we're close to the top of the hour. We're going to try to get through about 2 to 3 more questions here. Remember, if you can stick around, great. I would certainly love that. If you can't, remember, you can always watch a live later. If you got something better to do, just live will be uploaded on the YouTube page. Make sure you subscribe and just check those out there too. Number 7, I want to spend a good amount of time with this question here. Take your time with it. I'm going to read it out loud. A patient is admitted with the lab panel below. What is the most likely relationship to the lab value to the patient's diagnosis? Patient has a BUN of 25, a creatinine of 1.2, a cholesterol of 285, and an A1C of 9%. Work through those labs, put something on paper, and see what your best answer is going to be here. So, all of you should be reading through those answers, starting to get something on paper a little bit. If you're struggling a little bit, what I want to help you out to understand is remember, use your scratch paper to help you out. On the exam, I did this for every single question. So when I see these labs, what I want to help myself do is separate all of this running thinking and I want to get it all on paper really quick. So what I'll do is I'll write on my scratch sheet of paper, I'll write BUN and then I'll write whether it's high, low, or normal. So for those of you that are wrapped up with the question, tell me, is their BUN high? Is their creatinine high, low, or normal? Is their cholesterol high, low, or normal? And is their A1C high, low, or normal? What's going on? What do you all have for these labs right here? Okay. So I would say this BUN, just based on appearances, it feels actually it feels a little high to me. This BUN. BUN feels just a little high to me. Close, but it feels just a little bit high. This creatinine, it's kind of close within range, but I would say it's probably on the high end, 1.2. Cholesterol, when I look at that cholesterol, it just feels high to me. 285, I'm like, whoa, that's a high cholesterol. So yeah, that feels in my gut. I feel that one's gonna be pretty high. And then D, the A1, I'm sorry, and then A1C here, 9%. Oh, my cutoff is 6.5% for diabetes. So 9%, once again, it feels high. Okay. So then I'm going to write A, B, C, and D here and see which kind of fits with the relationship of the lab to a disease. A, patient's cholesterol is low, secondary to kidney disease. Well, right off the bat, just based on that interpretation of the labs, I know their cholesterol isn't low. So right off the bat, I don't have to go any deeper there. A is out of here, folks. B, patient BUN is low, secondary to liver disease. Well, right off the bat, once again, BUN is not low. And really with liver disease, we'll talk about that in the answers, but even still, I don't feel like the BUN is low. I feel like it's actually high. C, patient's creatinine is high secondary to muscle wasting. Okay, question mark there. And D, patient's creatinine is high secondary to kidney disease. Okay, well, right when I read answer D, I feel a little better with it because I feel like it does fit in my mind that high BUN means kidney disease, right? That those would fit and correlate together. C, the patient's creatinine is high secondary to muscle wasting. This also could be a true statement, but based on the fact that their BUN is high and their creatinine is high, I don't think it's a muscle wasting issue. To me, it actually feels like more of a kidney issue. So if I'm going to have to go with the best fit here, I would say D is by far our best fit. I am in agreement with all of you here. Very good, everyone. So that was correct. In that case, D is going to be your best answer. Here's a little reminder of your labs here. So your BUN normal is about 10 to 20. You're going to find something that says 7 to 20. 7 to 22, 10 to 22. It's going to be all over the place. But in general, I just say 10 to 20. For creatinine, I always put my normal levels as zero point 0.6 to 1.2, and that's what's in my mind there. If I do have something wrong, please let me know, but I feel that was kind of my best fit of what was in my mind there, but I've been known to be wrong before. Cholesterol desirable, and I say desirable, not high. I say desirable. Your doctor wants your cholesterol to be less than 200, right? So that's what desirable is. Just remembering that, like high, there's a cutoff for that. Moderately high, there's a cutoff for that too. So kind of keeping that in mind. And then for the A1C, remember the cutoff is greater than or equal to 6.5%. So once your A1C is 6.5% or above, you got diabetes. Okay. So we talked through why answer A and B, why answer A was a bad fit in that case. For B, the patient's BUN is low, secondary to liver disease. Well, one is we knew the BUN was not low, so we knew it couldn't have been that question there. The liver does have to do with BUN a little bit, actually. Keeping in mind that the urea cycle takes place inside your liver. So your liver takes your extra urea, right? Excuse me, let me back that up. The liver takes the ammonia that you have left over from protein metabolism. You have all this ammonia left over, and ammonia is bad. We don't like ammonia, whether it's pneumonia in our lungs or ammonia, the compound. Ammonia in the liver gets converted to urea. Okay, urea. So the liver does help process ammonia and create urea. However, that's not what's going on in this process. So we knew B was out. For C, the patient's creatinine is high secondary to muscle wasting. The only piece I wanted to say about this, folks, is remember when I think of creatine or creatinine, we think of muscle, right? Creatinine is a byproduct. It's a byproduct, it's a waste product. So when you have a lot of muscle loss, like in malnutrition, your creatinine goes up. Okay. Creatinine kind of goes up, right? It does elevate in that case. And yeah, this 1.2 is right on the borderline, but I'd say it's at least borderline high, right? It's a little bit creeped up in this case, at least you can see. It's not outrageously high, but it's on the borderline high at the very least. So that's all to say. In this case, C could be a true statement, but D is the best fit. And that's because the patient's creatinine is high secondary to the kidney disease. And I can see that because their BUN is high and their creatinine is high. Both of those together, that's definitely going to point to probably some type of kidney issue because you're not able to get rid of this waste product here. So although 1.2 is right on that borderline, I would still say it's pretty borderline high or at least high, one of the two. Definitely high range. Good job, folks. Really good. Any other questions about this before we move on to our last few questions of the night? You all have been awesome tonight. Okay. All right. So we're going to go through, let's go through one. Yeah, let's go through two more here just to wrap up our night. So, number 8, a patient with anaphylactic food allergies to fish, peanuts, and tree nuts reports fatigue, dermatitis, and scaly skin. The patient is most likely experiencing a deficiency in A, vitamin B9, B, omega 3s, C, vitamin A, or D, vitamin E. Take about 30 seconds, then I'm going to jump in with you on this question here. All right. So for this, let's write out our process of elimination here. A, B, C, and D. Let's go back to that. All right. So fatigue, dermatitis, scaly skin, and then they can't eat these types of foods. For A, vitamin B9, which would be folate. Hmm. Folate, what type of deficiencies do we think of? Do we think of fatigue and dermatitis and scaly skin? I don't. I kind of more think of pregnant women. I think of spina bifida, neural tube defects. Maybe the fatigue could fit pretty well there too. But vitamin B9 folate, I really don't think of as dermatitis. It doesn't come to my mind. And like I said, I'm not going to pick what I don't know. So I'm going to get rid of A in this case. B, omega 3 fatty acids. Okay. This could be a good fit for fatigue, dermatitis, and scaly skin. The scaly skin could fit into this here. So I'm going to hold on to that for right now. Vitamin A. Vitamin A, I always think of the eyes. That's what I always think of with vitamin A. It's good for our skin and hair and nails too, but really with the eyes, I think with vitamin A. So I'm going to think of more deficiencies focused on the eyes, and really here I don't see any. I would get rid of vitamin A in this case. D, vitamin E. Well, we know people take vitamin E for their skin, right? And that kind of fits with that dermatitis, scaly skin. So maybe it could be, but I don't know about the fatigue. That's kind of a tough one. So for routine B and D, I would say I'm going to go with what I feel more convicted with. To me, I feel like my best answer is going to be answer B in this case for omega 3 fatty acids. And that, in fact, is going to be the deficiency you see there. Okay. Omega 3 fatty acids directly from the text is going to lead to flaky skin, dermatitis, and fatigue. That's what typically occurs when you don't get your omega 3s and some of those essential fatty acids is these issues here. With vitamin E, which still I think is a good answer, folks, because we all take that, like we take it for our skin, right? We all think of the skin and oil. We think of moisturizing on our skin when we think of vitamin E. That is correct. However, vitamin E, not typically having lots of deficiencies, and the ones that do is typically going to be hemolytic anemia, neurological issues, maybe some skin. We'll put in there a little bit, but the fatigue itself, I don't think it was going to fit in that case. So that's why I would rule out vitamin E. Omega 3 fatty acids fits much better to the flaky skin, the dermatitis, and the fatigue there. So let's just keep that a little bit in mind here for our list. If you chose E, you are not, yeah, if you chose vitamin E, you didn't make a bad choice. It's just a choice between the two best answers. So don't kick yourself if you chose D. You didn't choose anything bad. It's just putting together what the best answer is. And if you were out there and you were able to get rid of answer A and get rid of answer C, guess what? You know some really good stuff here, RD to be. You really know what you need to do for these types of questions. It's just fine tuning a few of those small pieces like the omega 3s there. Okay? One more to finish your night. We didn't get quite to 10 questions, but I'm going to do one more here just to kind of let us all loose. I will send a 10th question through when I send the notes. Just make sure you are subscribed to that mailing list. I pinned that earlier in the YouTube chat. So if you didn't see that or if you want that again, I'm happy to bring that back up to you. But go ahead and take your time with this last question. Under anaerobic conditions, the body will rely on blank to produce the most ATP. Anaerobic conditions. Would it be A, glycolysis, B, gluconeogenesis, the C, the Krebs cycle, or D, lipolysis? Now, as you're working through the question, make sure you ask yourself, which of these processes require oxygen and which don't? Might be a few of those you don't know if they require oxygen, and that's okay. But there's two of these answers that I know may or may not require oxygen here. I'm going to write out A, B, C, and D. For A, glycolysis. Okay, so glycolysis being that first step in carbohydrate metabolism. I know from my days where I'd work out a lot more, in my days studying exercise science, that there's actually two different types of glycolysis. There's aerobic glycolysis, which is with oxygen, and there is anaerobic glycolysis. Okay, so I'm going to hold on to A for right now and let's see about these other answers. B, gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis, okay. So that would be the creation of new glucose out of things like glycerol. Different amino acids could fit into there. That would be kind of also like lactic acid, right? I can make like my lactate into that too with gluconeogenesis. B's a maybe. I'll put a little question mark by that. C, Krebs cycle. I don't think it's the Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle, I'm going to rule out because the Krebs cycle requires oxygen. The Krebs cycle would have to require oxygen, so I know it's not answer C. D, lipolysis. Okay, so lipolysis would be breaking down lipids, lipids and fatty acids. Fatty acids would then be used to make acetyl CoA, and acetyl CoA would have to go to the Krebs cycle. I don't think it's D either because I don't think that in anaerobic conditions, if I'm not able to use the Krebs cycle to process some of the acetyl CoA that comes from that lipolysis and comes from that beta oxidation, I don't think it's D. I think I got to rule that one out. So between A and B here, folks, I wanted to challenge you. You know I'm here to do that for you. My best answer is going to be A, glycolysis, because if you are sprinting on a track here, folks, you are not using your body fat. You are not going to be using your proteins for energy. That's not what you're using to make ATP. If you're sprinting on a track, you are using your glucose, whether it's stored or in your blood. And primarily, you are using anaerobic glycolysis, okay? Anaerobic glycolysis. So I know someone mentioned in the chat that glycolysis requires oxygen. Yes, one type of glycolysis requires oxygen. Anaerobic glycolysis does not. There are two types, okay? When we talk about anaerobic or really glycolysis in general, remember that as we come down, I'm going to show you this little chart. Here's glycolysis right here, right? So the glucose is getting processed into pyruvate, okay? This process right here, folks, this does not require oxygen, okay? It's nice when it has it. It's going to work a lot better when it has it, but it doesn't require it. There was no oxygen necessarily needed in this phase here. I got 2 ATP net from this, okay? So I got 2 net ATP from glycolysis itself. If I want to go on to the Krebs cycle, the Krebs cycle would have to require oxygen, okay? So this would have to require oxygen in order for me to go to the Krebs cycle here. There's no way I can go to Krebs if I'm in anaerobic conditions, meaning I am only limited mostly to glycolysis as my best way to yield energy, okay? Because what you'll do is you're going to go through, you're going to create 2 ATP. Then the next time you run a glucose through, you're going to create 2 ATP every single time doing that process. We could go over to the Cori cycle too, right? The Cori cycle is what we use to take pyruvate and create lactate, right? And then lactate can be made back into glucose. But even still, this process of like gluconeogenesis and the Cori cycle that you see here, folks, it's not producing much ATP in itself. Right here, what you're seeing, the Cori cycle, that's not producing the ATP. The gluconeogenesis, that's not producing the ATP. What's producing the ATP in this case is your glycolysis. And that's what's going on here. Highly encourage you to check out episodes or different sessions I've done talking about this. Rely on these drawings, come back to these more and more because we know biochem is so difficult. It's a big challenge. And that's why I'm throwing it in front of all of you because I want you all to be better with it. I want you all to understand it. And I want you all to be able to apply it for questions here. Okay. All right, my students. So I was very impressed with all of you tonight. I know it was very challenging. A lot of us are going to walk away just, I don't know, not sure how we feel with tonight. But what I want to remember is that you showed up. You showed up and you practiced. You showed up and you wanted to get better along your path of passing the RD exam. And that's what you did tonight. Is you got one step closer to your goal. Keep coming back. Keep listening to the podcast. Keep subscribing, liking, and checking out the lives that we're going to do. Reach out to me with any questions that you might have. And as always, I want to let you all know that I always mean it when I say, happy studying to you, RD to be. And I'll see you all very, very soon. Have a good night.